They say the earth remembers the screams of kings, and this one began in a pit of snakes. The air was thick with the stench of fear and burning oil. Torches flickered along the wooden walls of the arena, throwing shadows that danced like demons. Soldiers lined the edges, their armor glinting in the firelight, waiting for a show that would stain history forever. In the center stood Ragnar Lodbrok, the Viking wolf who had once made kingdoms tremble. His body was bruised, his hands bound, yet his eyes, calm, defiant, burned brighter than the flames around him. Across from him, King Aelle of Northumbria sat high upon his throne of stone, face pale as bone, heart black as the pit he had prepared. "Feed him to the serpents," Aelle ordered. His voice was cold, detached, the voice of a man pretending to be a god. The soldiers obeyed. The wooden gate creaked open, and the pit below came alive. Hundreds of snakes slithered, coiling over one another, hissing like the breath of hell itself. Ragnar was dragged to the edge. The crowd screamed for his death. He turned one last time, not to plead, but to stare directly at his killer. And in that silence, Ragnar smiled. "How the little piglets will grunt," he said, "when they hear how the old boar suffered." Then they threw him in. The sound that followed was not human, a chorus of hisses, screams, and the roar of fire meeting fate. King Aelle smiled, believing he had ended a legend, but the earth had already memorized his cruelty, because death, for a Viking, is never the end. And the last thing King Aelle would ever hear was the echo of his own name, whispered in vengeance. They say when a legend dies, the world holds its breath. When Ragnar Lodbrok's body hit the pit, the North screamed. The ravens carried the news faster than any ship. From icy fjords to burning halls, every Viking hearth fell silent. And then, the silence broke. Not with grief, but with rage. Bjorn Ironside struck his blade into the ground. "They fed our father to snakes," he spat. "We should burn England to the roots," Ubbi shouted back. "You'll only die like he did." Sigurd's voice trembled, torn between fury and disbelief. He was supposed to be untouchable. How could they kill Ragnar Lodbrok? Then came the sound, the heavy metallic thud of a crutch against stone. Ivar entered the hall, eyes cold, jaw set, voice like iron scraping steel. "Enough." The brothers froze. Ivar's crippled legs dragged behind him, but his presence filled the room like thunder. "No, we won't mourn him. We'll make England remember his name in screams." He lifted his dagger, sliced his palm, and let the blood drip onto his father's sword. The others hesitated, then followed. One by one, their blood joined, steaming against the cold steel. The hall shook with the rhythm of their oath. For Ragnar, for blood, for vengeance. Outside, the wind howled across the mountains like the cry of the old gods themselves. The flames rose higher, painting their faces red with fury and purpose. That night, the sons of Ragnar ceased to be men. They became something England had never seen before, a storm made of vengeance. And what that storm unleashed next would shake the world. They said vengeance had died with Ragnar Lodbrok. They were wrong. It had only learned to march. From the frozen fjords of Norway to the burning halls of Denmark, the sons of Ragnar rode beneath blood-red skies. The wind carried their father's name like a curse across the north. Villages stopped their feasts when they heard the drums. Children whispered, "The wolves are gathering." Bjorn Ironside, scarred and unbreakable, led men from the west, warriors with axes older than their kings. Ubbi came from the coasts, commanding ships built to slice through ice and flesh alike. Sigurd, with the mark of the serpent in his eye, brought clans that had once sworn to the gods themselves. And at the center of it all, Ivar, the Boneless, the cripple who could not walk, now commanded legions that could make continents tremble. They gathered beneath the northern lights, a sea of shields, torches blazing, the sound of war drums echoing through the mountains. Firelight reflected off dragon-headed ships waiting on the shore, ready to carry wrath across the sea. They didn't sail for gold, the storytellers would whisper later. They sailed for revenge. When their fleet finally moved, the ocean turned black. Each oar stroke was a heartbeat. Each wave carried a promise of blood. Across Europe, fear spread like plague. Monks wrote desperate prayers on parchment, churches rang their bells through the night, and English kings trembled in their halls. Somewhere, in the fog before dawn, Ivar stood at the prow of his ship. His eyes burned through the mist as he whispered, "We are the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, and we bring his wrath." Thunder rolled, drums roared, and from the sea rose the largest Viking host the world had ever seen, the Great Heathen Army. When their ships struck England's shores, the earth itself seemed to shiver, and what came with them would drown a kingdom in fire. They thought the Vikings would come screaming with axes in the night. They were wrong. They came with silence first, and silence is far deadlier. When the Great Heathen Army reached England, it didn't strike immediately. It watched, it listened, and it learned. Villages vanished before the kings even realized war had begun. Fires moved like ghosts through the countryside. By the time dawn broke, the map of England was already bleeding. York fell first, not by force, but by fear. Ivar the Boneless didn't just fight men, he fought minds. He sent forged letters between English lords, each accusing the other of betrayal. Allies turned enemies before his blades even touched them. He fought with his mind, not his muscles. England bled before ever facing his blade. Then came East Anglia. The English rode in confident, chasing what they thought was a retreating Viking line. Ivar's ships were gone, the fields empty. They thought they had victory, until the ground began to move. Their horses sank first, into mud disguised by fog. Then came the sound, drums, faint, echoing across the marsh. From the mist rose shadows, hundreds of Viking spears glinting red. The fog lifted, the survivors would whisper later, and what we saw was hell itself. Spears rained down, oil torches followed, the marsh erupted in flame, trapping soldiers between fire and mud. Men screamed, the smoke swallowing their prayers. From a ridge above, Ivar watched without blinking. Every movement precise, every death deliberate. When the battle ended, not a sound remained except crackling fire and the hiss of cooling blood. Far away in Northumbria, King Aelle received the news. His face went pale, his hands shook. He ordered the gates of York sealed and the walls fortified. Ivar smiled when he heard. He thinks walls can save him from a ghost. The drums began again, slow, heavy, relentless. The Viking host encircled York like wolves closing in on a wounded stag. Flames reflected in Ivar's cold eyes as he whispered, "Tomorrow, we open the pit again. And what waited inside that pit will make the world remember." They said York could never fall, that its walls were taller than fear itself. But fear doesn't climb walls, it seeps through them. At dawn, the gates of York stood open, not from surrender but from terror. Smoke crawled through the streets like living shadows. The ground shook beneath the boots of Ragnar's sons. The English banners, torn, soaked in ash, fluttered like dying birds. King Aelle's army had collapsed. His men fled, his priests prayed, his walls burned. And in the center of the ruined city, they found him, the man who once threw Ragnar Lodbrok into a pit of serpents, now dragged before his enemies in chains. He was no longer a king, just an old man shaking beneath the weight of his sins. The Vikings formed a circle around him. No one spoke. Only the wind dared to whisper. Then, through the smoke, a single figure approached, iron crutch striking stone with every step. Ivar the Boneless. His eyes were colder than steel, his voice a whisper sharper than any blade. "You fed my father to serpents," he said. "Now, I'll give you wings." Aelle tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. There was no mercy left in that square, only judgment. The torches dimmed, the crowd fell silent, and the ritual began. The blood eagle, not merely execution, a message to the gods, to honor Ragnar, to feed vengeance itself. The flames reflected in Ivar's eyes as the wind howled around them. "The wings spread," a soldier would later whisper, and the cries faded, and silence became the loudest sound in the world. Ivar didn't blink. He watched as the man who once ruled England was unmade, piece by the same fate he had given another. But behind those frozen eyes, something darker stirred. Was this justice, he wondered, or madness wearing its mask? When it was over, Aelle's crown lay in the dirt beside him, broken, soaked in red. The ground of England was no longer earth. It was memory. It was vengeance fulfilled. Ivar turned away, his voice barely more than breath. "For every tear Ragnar shed in that pit," he said, "England wept 1,000. He looked to the sky, gray, endless, uncaring. The crowd expected a cheer, a roar, a cry of victory. But there was nothing. Only the crackle of dying flames and the sound of Ivar's crutch echoing into the silence. "When the serpent dies," he murmured, "the eagle forgets how to fly." And with that, the man who had avenged his father walked away from the ruins of a kingdom, carrying nothing but the weight of his own soul. They said Ivar won, that the man who avenged Ragnar Lodbrok had conquered England itself. But victory can rot faster than a corpse. York became his kingdom, but not his home. The fires of conquest died, leaving only smoke and silence. At night, the halls were filled with whispers, not cheers. The people bowed, but never met his eyes. Children hid when his crutch struck the stone floors. Priests crossed themselves when he passed. The throne he once dreamed of was colder than the steel beneath it. He had built it from bones, and every creak of the wood sounded like his father's last breath. He walked through the corridors alone, the echo of his own footsteps chasing him like ghosts. Outside, the north wind howled through the broken windows, and for the first time, he wondered if the gods were laughing. "I avenged my father," he murmured, "but I killed the son he raised." In that moment, the great Ivar, the boneless, the fearless, the cursed, understood the truth that no warrior ever wants to face. Revenge doesn't fill the void. It only widens it. He looked out over the sleeping city, his face lit by a dying flame. "They called me Ivar the Boneless," he whispered, "but it wasn't my body that was broken. It was my soul." The wind carried his words into the dark, and somewhere in that silence, a voice, soft, familiar, seemed to answer, "My son." Fade to black. The drums slow. The sea roars in the distance.